Welcome to Retaili tic, the official podcast of Coresight Research for April 21st, 2026. This week, our CEO, Deborah Weinswig, dives into the cutting edge of agentic AI with Crescendo Chief Product Officer Todd Famous and Senior Vice President Mike Ryan. They discuss how AI is impacting consumer experience in retail, both in the store and online. But before we hear from Todd and Mike, here are some highlights of the research publishing on Coresight.com this week. Our series on supply chain innovations continues with coverage of the beauty and CPG sectors. The U.S. Retail Sales Outlook Report has the latest actuals and predictions, and our Consumer Insights series covers the latest results from our weekly consumer survey. Visit Coresight.com to check out our full catalog of over 7,000 reports, webinars, and datasets. Now here's Deborah with Todd and Mike.
Thank you so much for joining another episode of Retaili tic. We are very excited to have Todd Famous and Mike Ryan from Crescendo. So let's start off by getting to know these two folks a little bit better. So Todd, you have a very deep background in infrastructure and product. I think, you've been in product management or chief product officer since day one. Can you talk to us a little bit about what's changed in that world, but also why you started there?
Sure. I've been with Crescendo since the beginning. I was part of the founding team. We're a little over 2 years old, but I've been in the customer service and the contact center industry for decades in product management. So my background is in really large enterprise customer service and sales contact centers. I've worked for vendors in the software space, and we started the company because of AI. I mean, basically because we've been trying for years, our other co-founders for years or decades, to make service and customer experience better, and only made incremental improvements. But when you look at what's happening with AI, it's going to be dramatic. And so we're very enthusiastic about what's happening now.
And maybe dive into, I think you were at Cisco for over 20 years. What was it like to be at a company for 20 years? Because that's like unheard of these days. And what did you see change during your time there?
So when I was there, when we started the business, we were the first software group in Cisco, actually, and we were the contact center business unit. And we, at the time, during the sort of internet boom, if you will, Cisco was growing very rapidly and looking to expand into other markets. So I got into Cisco through an acquisition, and we were the first network-based contact center system, which was, a crazy thing to do back in the day, and went from sort of entering the market to first in the contact center space. So something like, maybe half of the Fortune 500 run on Cisco contact center infrastructure.
And one last question, if we think about where contact centers went from and where they are now, what does that timeline look like in terms of what's changed over time?
Well, during those years, I mean, we transitioned from digital to network-based or internet and e-commerce, and all of those things happened. Then mobile happened, and then cloud happened. So all of those transitions over my career, they've all been significant. The way you do business has changed from the phone to the web to mobile over the last a few decades. I would say that they've all been incremental improvements. So a lot of the technology coming from the vendors, and I was on the vendor side, and being deployed by the businesses were incremental improvements. A lot of cost offsets and incremental improvements to efficiency, cost. I mean, cost is a large part of running those sorts of organizations. So efficiency and cost, but not dramatic, I would say. I'd like to think that customer service is better than it was 20 years ago, but it's just a little bit better. I mean, most people still think that customer experience, whether they're buying or getting support on something that they've just bought, is not something you look forward to for sure. So, and a lot of that has to do with cost and what happens on the enterprise side to run those sorts of operations. And so, again, with AI, particularly the large language model AI tech, we have a possibility to completely turn things upside down in terms of abundance of technology to do customer service.
I always felt that if customer service was better, we wouldn't have almost a 50% return rate in apparel, fashion, and accessories, right?
The return rate is actually it's interesting. We've done a bunch of work in that area where we're using AI to analyze the reasons for returns. Maybe just an anecdote there. We had a customer that was in the shoe business, and they were getting returns of too large for their boots and too small for their sandals, essentially. They had no idea. They knew return rates, but they didn't know the why, or that there was a distinction in sizing over or under on different types of footwear. And so with AI, we actually looked at all those transcripts for all those returns, and then we advised them. And by the way, this is the cutting edge of what we're doing. It's not just delivering service, but giving them business insights that were showing that their returns were because of something that they didn't even fully understand from the metrics that they had been collecting.
That's so interesting. I mean, returns are one of the things that I focus on quite a bit because it introduces, actually, it's a great segue to kind of Mike's background. I have a very deep background in supply chain. And if you start to think about reverse logistics, et cetera, right, that brings up so much. Mike, I know you spent a lot of time at Project 44, which I know from my supply chain background. It's really interesting with both of you. I mean, it's not often that, right, like somebody such as Todd has been in product his whole life and you've been in marketing your whole career. So maybe from a marketing perspective, I feel like that's where we've seen the greatest change in my career. But maybe if you can kind of take us from, either if it was by company or by era almost, how have you seen things changed as it relates to kind of, whether it's B2C or B2B?
I joined Crescendo in May, and as you said, my background has been supply chain for 7 years prior to that. And I also spent some time in IoT, which sounds like a really odd path to a customer experience company. But what I watched happen in those industries gave me, I think, a really clear window into where the world in AI was heading. I saw how fragmented the operations were, right? How complex it actually was to transform manual process, right? Logistics and connected devices. It's so ingrained in the way that the industry works. But the thing that kept striking me, I think, across supply chain and IoT in my move into Crescendo was how central the customer experience was to literally everything. It's not just a support function, and the customer interaction was the most valuable signal in the entire business. It tells you what's breaking in your supply chain, what's confusing about your product, where your pricing should be, where your returns policy is wrong. So I think every function of the business should be paying closer attention to what customers are actually saying. And there's too many businesses that aren't. And a big reason for that is the data is trapped in siloed places, right? Where a lot of businesses haven't figured out how to unlock that yet. So I looked at where this all was heading, and I think the convergence of large language models, voice AI, multimodal capabilities, all these things were maturing at the same time to the point where you could actually build something genuinely intelligent in a customer conversation that wasn't possible before. Whereas most of the industry solutions have been built on older logic and technology like decision trees. So that was I think a huge opportunity and unlock for the industry that I saw and I really wanted to be a part of. I think the other thing that I saw was that vendors are selling software and walking away. Technology has advanced so fast, but there hasn't been the accountability yet for results. And so Crescendo thought about this differently and was built around a simple idea that what if we actually took on the risk ourselves, only got paid when it actually worked and delivered outcomes for the customer.
I think it's really interesting you bring that up because we've had so many of our clients on the retail side, brands, hospitality, who are, diving in through our AI council, et cetera, to, whether it's LMs, multimodal, agentic, but it's been very difficult for them to measure the ROI. I think
Why are they diving in? Why are they diving in? Do they know?
Yes, that's a great, because the board would like them to.
Yes,
So
exactly.
the board applies pressure to leadership. Leadership goes to, right, IT, whether that's CIO or CTO. And then, of course, they pop up and, we need a head of AI. This is where it gets, I'm so glad you asked that. Thank you. This is where it gets, because I can like predict what's going to happen before I go into most people's offices or get on a call. Then they're going to pop up a head of AI who reports into the business, right? Who's then kind of not going back to silos, or I think silos are actually getting worse, not better, because you then have these very interesting dynamics. And I'm seeing it play out again and again and again, where you either have many different solutions running almost in, let's just say, making it difficult to kind of come up with a single source of truth because everything is looking at different data. And at Coresight, right, when we were doing a very simple kind of agent to go and fetch data for our clients, right, from our huge database, what we started to realize is something that's so simple that is, right, what's your projection for 2025 apparel, footwear, and accessory sales? Well, we did that same projection in 2020, 21, 22, 23, right? Like, and so something that should be so simple is actually much more complex. And then you start to think about across these organizations that have data in many different places, right? Excels, PDFs, et cetera. And everything is labeled a bit differently. And so I think you bring up a very important point, which is why are they doing this? How are they doing this? And who is it that really wants to? And then ultimately, how do you measure it? And so I don't know if from what you've seen, right, when folks maybe kind of get to your front door, how are they getting there? And is it that the board asks them senior leadership, and so they're trying to kind of make something work?
I ask because I think the first most common thing we think is they've heard about AI, they need to do AI, which is okay. So that's actually the next level down, which I cringe about, is like, oh, we've heard that AI is going to replace all of our people, so it's going to save us money. And the reality is that AI automation can save you money. It can improve productivity. That is an element of the business case. It's part of the conversation. In my personal opinion, especially in the retail, if that is your motivation, you've sort of lost the narrative slightly. I mean, we deliver sort of cost benefit to all of our deployments, but that's not the narrative that I think is the big win for AI. I think it's going to be improving customer experience. So like, for example, if you can use AI to save productivity, do you take that to your bottom line, or do you expand your hours of operation where you can talk to your customers? Or do you expand the language capability that you can offer? Or do you expand, and I would say increase the salaries and the quality of your staff? So do better with the savings. Now, take some of the savings, but if you're solely focused on savings, that's what you're going to get. And you're going to, I mean, eventually in a competitive market where you're competing against other retailers or whatnot, you're going to start to lose ground on the customer experience.
You bring up a really interesting point because this is one of the top ones that we have conversations with our clients on a daily basis. So, the number in the market is, right, if we do AI, we'll save 30 to 40% in terms of efficiencies. And so either we can bring that to the bottom line or we can do more. And in many cases, right, it's what we find is the first half of every year, they want to do more. Then kind of comes like end of second quarter. And all of a sudden they're like, oh, wow, we've got to like post our results for the year. So then the back half of the year ends up being kind of operating expenses and more about efficiencies. And that's how it's played out in 24 and 25. I mean, 23, we're just kind of getting started. So it'll be interesting to see what happens this year. I do think, and Mike, it's really interesting because ultimately this is about them marketing to shareholders what they've been able to do with AI to transform their businesses, right? So now there's, right, like heads of digital and heads, kind of digital and transformational kind of AI. I mean, there's all these additional roles. So you're seeing the C-suite is expanding again, but ultimately how they're measured, I think is a question. So, Mike, how do you see companies messaging doing AI and what's kind of working for them, either B2C or B2B?
Yeah, I think ultimately, a lot of this is about trust. I think trust that the technology is going to work, trust that the customer experience is actually going to hold up after deployment, trust that when something goes wrong and things do go wrong, that there's someone accountable on the other end. And I think when we see what we see in the back half of the year pressure you're describing is actually a symptom of deployments that maybe weren't set up with the right outcomes from the start. Because if you define success as resolved customer interactions rather than deflection rate or containment rate, you'd have an easier time defending that at any time of the year. And so I think the problem is that deployments don't always start with the right objectives in mind. And yeah, as Todd said, like the retailers I think that are most interesting right now are the ones who have stopped treating AI as the cost line and started treating it as the customer relationship layer. It's less where it becomes less about what did we save, and more about how do we increase retention, repeat purchase, and lifetime value.
It's interesting. I was talking to a head of CX for like a $2.5 billion retailer yesterday, and it was interesting. First of all, everyone defines it differently. So that can be a challenge, and thus everybody measures it differently. Also, if an organization, let's call it unified commerce, so they have stores, they're online, maybe they're working with a third party to do last mile to the consumer, and that a lot of that's kind of customer experience is unfortunately out of their hands. And so how do both of you kind of define, right, CX? Because I think if we got a group of people together, everybody would define it a little bit differently.
I then define it pretty simply. It's what your customers experience from you as a vendor, as a retailer. In our business, we're focused on an element of the overall CX. So I don't sort of suggest that CX fits into one particular bucket. I mean, if you're a retailer, for example, and you have stores, then how they experience the store is part of the customer experience. And I guess more narrowly, in terms of what we're doing in the AI area, is handling customer experience from a digital or a mobile perspective, where the customer reaches out to the brand. Speaking of, like, so say Shopify, for example, they're a great partner, and we view that platform as an excellent way to handle the commerce experience. One thing that's very, it can get sort of forgotten by people in my industry is that in a great customer experience, the customer might arrive at a site, they might select something, they might buy it, and they never reach out to. When they reach out to customer service, if you will, is when something goes sideways, like they got confused or such. So customer service, if you will, is always supporting the broader CX and the mission of actually delivering sort of low friction customer experiences. Yeah, again, our particular focus is in the area where those things need assistance. The sort of automated path is the best path, and when the automated path needs a little bit of help along the way, that's where technology like ours in the AI space gets involved.
Yeah, it's a great question. I think you're right. Everyone defines it differently depending on who you're talking to, and that's maybe part of the problem as well. A lot of companies define CX, right, just as the support function. When something goes wrong or when you're having to be reactive, the way I think about it is that it's every moment that customer has with your brand where they're actually forming an opinion or forming their perception of you, like when they're trying to find the right product, or when they're interacting with your support, or when they're checking out, like when they need help, when they want to return something, and ultimately, like the moment where they decide if they're actually going to come back. I think in the commerce world, where you've got, as you described, like stores, you have brick and mortar stores, you have online, you have last mile, and all those touch points are reaching the customer. The challenge, I think, is that like they're all owned by different teams with different metrics, and so what you don't want to do is have the customer feel the weight of your org chart. You want them to you don't want them to have to think about that at all. But it's really the sum of all those moments, and I think the question is whether you're actively managing them as a system or just hoping that like each one individually works out. I think that's where AI can unlock, if it's done right, unlock visibility into a lot of those moments holistically, and so that you see the whole journey and not just one piece of it.
I'll give you an example, like it's maybe a contrarian sort of thought example. We were working with a customer who went as an e-commerce customer, gifts, if you will. So customer buys something, and they had set up their system such that in 7 minutes it leaves the warehouse or goes to the warehouse. And this was sort of like a triumph from their perspective that this flow worked really fast. Now, the problem is that customers, when buying gifts, it's kind of a funny thing in the e-commerce space, they sometimes put in their address when they're trying to send it to the other party. So when we're delivering their customer service and we're looking at their inquiries, and like 30% of their inquiries are people who are shipping to the wrong address. So we worked with them, actually. So this is the counterintuitive part. We told them, stop shipping in 7 minutes. It doesn't really matter. Ship in 30 minutes. So they delayed the recommendation is to delay the time in which they left the warehouse, which is seems sort of counterintuitive, but to make it possible so that when the customer fat fingers the wrong address and they get that shipping confirmation, that they're like, oh, I sent it to the wrong place, or I picked the wrong color, that they have a window to make that correction with the customer experience team. So they reach in for customer service and they change the address. So that's understanding CX. It's basically not just mechanically executing e-commerce, but like understanding how customers experience. And when we were looking at this customer's work, you could see lots of upset customers because they shipped things in the wrong way. And so the AI is big flashing red light. customers are unhappy. And the main reason your customers are unhappy is because they can't change the shipping address when they make a mistake. And so it's not actually a complicated fix, but like I guess maybe a thoughtful fix in terms of how you think about CX.
It's interesting. I worked at an ML, big data company, and we would ingest, once again, we can ingest and clean in like 2 months. This is a few years, about 10 years ago. What was fascinating is we were just looking at pattern recognition. I have to say, of any job I've loved, it was so interesting, right? Especially I'm like, because you would see things that companies either couldn't, right? Because going back to that, like single source of truth, they couldn't see in their data, or you're so close to it, sometimes you just don't see it. And so it's very interesting to hear, right, how Crescendo, because I've always said, to me, it was a huge, I was required by Zebra. It's a huge problem to solve, right? And I never really saw a company who kind of picked up where obviously we continue to work inside of Zebra, but independently, because the opportunity there to help companies, and I'm not talking in a consulting, I mean, of course there's a consulting aspect to everything you do, but it's, if you're starting to, because ultimately customer experience, I've always thought, is about recognizing patterns that either create joy or not joy. And I mean, Mike, ultimately, right, if you're in marketing, right, that's all that you're doing, right? And you're trying to figure that out. And so, I mean, if you think about where we are, right, in terms of AI right now, I mean, I think Opus 4.7 just dropped yesterday, and I mean, I'm down the rabbit hole with everybody else. The abilities or the capabilities that we all have individually, and then maybe as an enterprise, I don't know about you, I'm finding that my tolerance for friction has gone so, like, I've been thinking about this a lot. I've kind of written it down literally on a piece of paper, because I start to worry that things that we used to be able to handle before, we're not going to be able to handle as well, because we're like, you know what? I'm just going to kind of like pull the ripcord, exit, and go figure this out myself. So, Mike, in that kind of a world, how are people changing? What do they expect? And I think marketing is like this idea that brings joy and happiness, right? We're seeing like marketing tied in with music, and it's just such an interesting time in terms of, I mean, just the amount of change, but also I think it's both exogenous and internal as well, how the consumer's looking at it. So how do you think about it from a marketing perspective? How do you then think about the customer experience with marketing, with your marketing, and how has that changed over time?
Yeah, the bar has definitely moved. I mean, it's moving every single day with the rate of change that's happening. And I agree with you that I think the tolerance for friction is all, my tolerance is certainly dropping. I'm feeling that in my interactions with brands, and it's happening quite frankly faster than people realize. I mean, like you said, with Opus 4.7, it's like it's almost a full-time job just keeping up with the changes that are happening in AI. And I think everyone's feeling that. Everyone's also feeling the mandate to implement AI. But when I think about, the customer expectations, I do think there's like a reset happening. I think every interaction, whether it's through support or through your marketing, has to be a great experience across every channel. I think the bar is certainly raising, and most companies haven't figured it out yet, right? How to achieve the potential that we have in front of us. And so I think we're all figuring this out together.
A throwback story to like retail and your return process. If you back to the .com, and this is, I guess, a cliche Amazon story, but once they automated the return process so that when you received a product, you could return it without calling them. They were the first to do that in the e-commerce space. And there's what's called a transitive nature of customer experience. So once you've experienced that from one retailer, you expect it from all the others. So, I mean, Amazon obviously is a force in retail, but when they're doing something, every other retailer needs to be thinking not just of delivering customer experience, but how they compare to the most technologically advanced retail experience, how fast they get shipments, all of those things become comparables, which is what causes that decline instead of, or expectation increase, because the bar raises on one experience, it crosses over into all other expectations.
That's right. And one more piece on that, Deborah, like I think that's certainly relevant as we talk about logistics. And now we have the technology to start to piece these things together. But when I think about the supply chain world I came from, we spent, billion, there were billions of dollars spent trying to optimize the flow of physical goods, right? You're trying to reduce waste, you're trying to reduce returns, you're trying to reduce friction in the supply chain. And the whole time, like the most valuable data about goods, moving in the wrong direction are literally, again, getting back to customer experience or sitting, in your support tickets. Those the data fragmentation piece is also has made this a really challenging problem to solve, and making that connection is probably the biggest opportunity that we have. But returns, as Todd said, like it's really not just a logistics problem; it's an information problem, and managing the flow of information to the right places.
I mean, I will say I didn't realize the supply chain was going to be kind of hot for 2 weeks during the pandemic. And then, right, everyone was back into store tech and all that. But in those 2 weeks, to me, what was shocking was everyone's like, where's my stuff? And I'm like, what do you mean, where's your stuff? Right? It's in a container somewhere. But they're like, but where? And I'm like, what? And so this inability for companies to find their own goods, let alone the customer's purchase, these were some of the things that you were like, how is this going back to logistics? How have we not enabled this? And to me, I really think when you survey consumers, yes, the number one thing they ask about is like, where's my stuff? And when is it going to arrive? And then if it's a gift, that was such a great example because I think we've all done that. Did the gift end up, right? Because sometimes I'll realize that I was expecting some kind of thank you or whatever. Then all of a sudden the gift shows up. I was like, gosh, the company was so nice. They sent me one. They sent my friend one. And then all of a sudden honestly, it's because I'm very, all of a sudden, right? You're like, oh no, I didn't do that. But of course you did. And it's interesting in supply chain, right? There've been many different technology solutions that have kind of been enabled. One of them that I loved was a company called Supply AI. And if they saw you ordering things in, let's say, extra small, medium, they would call you and they'd be like, we just want to make sure that, you had meant to order all that. And of course, in many cases they did. I remember being on the receiving end. I got a call from Bloomingdale's, and I didn't usually order whatever product I was buying, some stuff for travel. And they're like, did you mean order all this? I'm like, oh yeah. I'm traveling. I just want to make sure I'm getting it. But I will say from a customer point of view, and I knew it was driving the call, but the fact that they inbounded, that customer experience, it went up kind of a few notches for me. And I thought that was, incredibly interesting. I mean, Todd, as you think about the problems that you're solving and then the ones that you can solve, how do you kind of think of those on a continuum? Because what I'm finding with AI, well, two things: either people are incredibly narrowly focused, or they're all over the place, because it's kind of oh, I can do this and I can do this and I can do this. So how do you kind of keep things sequential and realistic?
We use AI. I actually, and I'm serious about that. One of the things, actually, I'll give you a quote from a customer that we were talking to back in February. We launched sort of this insights dashboard, which was basically where you could traditionally using data science and pattern recognition. Okay. But you can imagine with a large language model AI technology, it's conversational. So you can ask anything about the data. So I know I had to say it 3 times, but just imagine that every customer conversation you have in data. Now imagine that you can talk to something that has knowledge of every one of those conversations at the same time at once, and you can ask it anything about anything. And we rolled out this insights dashboard where you could have this conversation and ask anything. And one of our customers said, this is amazing. And then they were like, I'm now going to really have to think about what to ask, because I don't know what I should ask. What if I'm not constrained by IT or what was set up, you can ask anything to an agent. Then you had to find out what to ask. And you might have experienced that kind of situation with whatever, a consumer product like ChatGPT. One of the next unlocks is to ask AI what to ask. I know it's sort of repetitive, but you can say things to technology, you can say things like, what are the things that I should be concerned about related to CX? So in a traditional software stack, in the technology, again, several years ago, you would have had to, as a business, define what are the KPIs, what you want to track, what you're looking for, and then wait for project deployment and data science and reports and SQL databases, and they would have produced the metrics that you wanted. But when the turnaround time is instantaneous, you can begin the conversation with what should I ask? And then you can like really wander down certain paths. Like I'm really interested in how consumers are thinking about ordering birthday cards this year. And is that, is that something that we should maybe adjust our customer experience related to that? So you can sort of wander down, any path you want with AI. And like, again, you can ask the AI what you should be concerned about. You can just say what your role is and ask it what it thinks. And you'll get interesting things. It's like your experiences with the consumer products. It's really good at brainstorming. You know, you need to go back and forth. It's not like it's just going to one shot and solve all your problems. But when you brainstorm and you interact, you can actually get to really good places, especially when you bring your experience into the conversation.
I think one thing that you kind of like just unlocked is, right, every company has different, either, demographics, psychographics of customers. And so what we've found is when you treat everyone the same, because it's, a matter of cost or bandwidth, that, if everybody's Jane and Jack and Jane, that can be a challenge. But now that you can have multiple kind of personalities and, Jane and Jack and Julie and Joe and all of that, what we've started to find is that companies are starting to think about, okay, this customer lives in the suburbs or they're rural and they are, let's say they're avidly on TikTok or they're right. And so what is the kind of going back to, it's really always about experience, but experience, product, how do they want to be spoken to? And so I still dream about in the physical world, but the idea that they can meet me where I am. I mean, I've said this on stage for years. I've shopped many times at Target, right? I just want to like walk through the doors. I want to have like kind of, opted in. And I want them to like bring me a cart with a cup holder with like a bottle of water, right? And I'm happy to pay for that. They should know I've been into their stores like hundreds of times. And so this idea, I think this goes back to like the friction, is that I think that consumers are only going to be so patient. And I do believe with AI, and I've said this from day one, that there is a first mover advantage. I mean, let's look at ChatGPT. Not going to say anything. I like to talk in the positive world, but there are definitely other competitors out there who may be better. But because everyone started there, right, that's kind of what everyone still is centered upon. And I think that for retail, especially right now, if you start to change, let's say the humans change their own workflows, right? And so how I order groceries, maybe I like download the Instacart app into ChatGPT, and then I'm like, okay, I need lemons and I need limes, right? I'm like margarita mix, whatever. And so I'm starting to change my behavior at an exponential pace. And then the idea that I even have to talk to like Alexa or Google Home or whomever is like here in my house with me, or and so there's that. But then when I go to the store, right, like I expect a phenomenal experience. And so I think that, and the consumer, right, consumer traffic is up. I mean, it's been up in 22, 23, 24, 25. I mean, you talk to the mall operators, they're shocked at what they've been seeing. Because it goes back to, I think the more you remove friction from the online piece, in some ways it frees up the customer's, kind of mind or time. And they go to the stores to, right, like discover the, let's just say, you know, whether it's finding something that they didn't know existed or finding kind of like the perfect color. And then they'll go back oftentimes and purchase that online because they want to think about it. But all of that is really changing. And it may be subtle for now, but I do think that it changes, right? It's like this and then until it's like that. And so how do you guys, and Mike, I'm gonna throw this one to you. How do you help companies? And I don't know if you, I assume you're working across hospitality, right? Like those who are consumer facing industries. How do you help them think about, right, this kind of timeline and what they need to do at what point in the game so that they are not left behind? Because that's what I worry more about right now than anything.
Yeah, it's such a powerful, I love that anecdote. It's such a powerful insight. It completely reframes how you think about digital CX too. It's not just, it's not competing with the store. They're working, it's feeding it, right? They're working together. And I think when the online experience is effortless, like when the your questions get answered instantly. The order's right. What you're looking for is in stock. In some cases, if the return is painless, you don't feel as drained by the brand, and people feel good about that. And I think the goodwill shows up when you also walk in the store. So I think it's about removing that friction from the digital experience so that you're not taking away the customer's mental energy. Because you're right, it's a lot easier to do that when you have somebody in person. I think the brands that get the digital experience right, are doing those things. That's certainly what we're building towards at Crescendo. It's not just, better support, and it's definitely not just lower costs. Although those are benefits, but it's really about the customer who leaves every leaves every interaction or support ticket with your brand, and they're feeling a little bit better about it when they started. I think, there's evidence of this too. We're seeing this in deployments where obviously there's a lot of places as a consumer where you can go and leave your thoughts. Peer review sites like Trustpilot or other online review sites, Google reviews. We're seeing that, our customers are going to those sites and talking about how great of an experience they had with our AI, right? And that's unheard of. We haven't seen that before. So, it's something we're certainly, we're focused on, but I think it's, starting with those highest friction moments and, fixing and pulling the results forward online as well.
I hate to say the bar we set so low as an industry over the past 20 years, but like Mike was referring to one of our customers who had massive Trustpilot jumps when we went live. And the thing that did, which is actually quite small, but basically when a customer wanted to return the product, let's say they sent an email for return before they were getting a canned response. And so when we had the AI write the response, and if you've worked with these technologies, you know how beautifully they write. So this is a really simple problem, basically. So they write, I'm very sorry that your such and such broke, that must have made it difficult for your son's birthday or whatever. Just a short, like one sentence of personalization in front of here's your options. Do you want a replacement? Do you want a refund? By the way, second part, quickly. So not like 4 hours later, but like a couple minutes later. So you send, this devastating broken product situation and you have to return. You get feels to you as an empathetic response quickly within minutes, as if it was written and it was written with care, although by AI, and it just massively changes your whole worldview on dealing with the business. Like the CX is just completely different by just a couple sentences of personalization.
You bring back a little PTSD where we were helping some companies and we were having conversations with their customers on just how angry they were getting over different, right? Like they were kind of bounced around from person to person. Then the call got dropped. They were told by some people that it could be fixed, others that it couldn't. And it goes back to Mike, what you said, this kind of like exhaustion with the brand, right? By the time you're done, right? And what would have cost them like $15 just to be like, you know what, we'll just credit you for that. You don't have to, like, some very simple things. And so I do think that very compassionate kind of one line or two lines can, like, the value of that, I think, is undersold in many cases, because if I feel the brand empathizes with me, I mean, we had like a crazy, so I live in New York. Crazy. I mean, I don't know what happened, but I'm a just in time kind of person. And so my daughter, I think, was leaving for camp on Sunday. I ordered all her stuff the Tuesday before from Walmart, and like none of it showed up. So I call, right? I was like, there's just too much stuff I like now don't have. And I will tell you, I had to put myself on mute because I was like laughing out loud. The guy was fabulous, by the way. And he's like, in New York, we hear they just throw it out of the truck on the sidewalk and then people just take it. I was like, exactly. Like, there is some order to the system. He was just like, and I mean, honestly, this is like, I still remember the conversation almost word for word, because he was not only incredibly empathetic, he basically overnighted everything to me and credited. Like, it was such a great experience that I was like, and he was just like, he's like, I can't imagine what that experience must be like for you. He's like, you're looking. And so, but right, being on the phone takes time, right? So probably what I could have done over email or whatever, or with a agent in a few minutes, right? That was probably about 30 minutes. So but I remembered it. And I think that sometimes I've always said, and I believe this personally and professionally, like, little things add up to big things. And so you may be able to retain customers or see a greater customer lifetime value if you start to look at just some of these little things. And so from a Wall Street perspective, right, we all want to see that companies are doing AI, and that's important, but it doesn't have to be, it can be something like what we've discussed on this call. We just need an example that companies are moving something forward. It doesn't have to be a complete overhaul of, let's say, God forbid, supply chain. And so like if I were to kind of, for those who are listening, right, it's just about, I mean, I've more than enjoyed this conversation with Mike and Todd, but sometimes it's just about doing the little things and getting started, as opposed to having this kind of, ostentatious idea around what you think either Wall Street wants, your customers want, or your employees want. Because I think this is one of those cases where, yes, we're an N of one, but probably what bothers us bothers a lot of other people too. And so thinking about, asking AI, I think Todd is a perfect example, but also just thinking about, right, what would I want to change in the shopping experience? First of all, do not show me out of stocks, because that like drives me crazy. More than I'm like, all I want is the extra small and the black, and it's like the only one that's sold out, right? So I think there's something to that. But secondly, if it is sold out and I am like annoyed, certainly having some kind of intervention along the way, right? I understand that must be challenging, right? We'll give you 15% off if you'll take the red. So I think there are kind of small things that do add up to big things. So we have, in our last 10 minutes, we always have a very fun lightning round. So the rules of the game are that either of you can pass, and you can also phone a friend. And so, Mike, if I have you can turn over to Todd, or however you want to do it. So we're going to get started so that we stay on time. So once again, whoever wants to answer, or whoever wants to kind of phone a friend, it's all anything's game. So number one, most overhyped phrase in enterprise AI right now.
Agentic.
Number two, feel free to agree or disagree as well. Number two, one customer service metric leaders rely on too much.
I mean, I just go with like average handle time, I guess, just because it leads you such down a dark path.
I think that's great. And number three, one metric they do not rely on enough.
Customer lifetime value. It's quite hard to measure.
Yeah, they avoid the hard ones. They avoid the hard ones. That's a good point.
I agree with you there. Number four, biggest reason AI pilots fail to scale.
The human expertise needed to make it work.
Yeah, the cost to maintain.
That's good. Number five, more important in CX today, speed or resolution?
I'm a speed guy, but that's an opinion, I think. But what do you think, Mike?
Resolution.
Okay. Oh, good. I like this. All right. Number six, harder problem, technology integration or organizational change?
Org change.
Organizational change. Sure.
I'm with you guys as well.
Yeah.
Number seven, one thing enterprises still misunderstand about customer expectations. I think there's many, but maybe one.
That's hard to put into one.
Well, I think I've got one. I think it's what you were talking about before, which is it's the little things that matter.
I think
I think that enterprises overestimate, how much customers want to engage. Again, I'm going back to the speed thing. They want things done fast and quickly and easily, low friction, as opposed to like lots of communications, I'd say.
I think that's good. All right. Number eight, category you think will adopt AI and CX faster than people expect?
E-commerce.
Well, I expect e-commerce to adopt quickly. So I would say manufacturing.
Oh yeah, that's a good one. I'm there. One part of customer service that should remain human for longer than the market thinks.
I mean, I think that the way I phrase the role of people, and we are very focused on people in our offer, is exceptional work. So not necessarily difficult or even empathetic, but exceptional is where I think automation falls short and people outperform AI.
Relationship management, I think, for high stakes moments in particular.
Yeah, that could even, when it relates to loyalty, et cetera. That's a really good point. All right, number 10, I'd love for both of you to answer this one. In one word, what will matter most in CX over the next 3 years?
I mean, I would say AI. I mean, it's what the whole topic is about. I know it's like overhyped, but believe me, it is underhyped. What's coming from the technology is unbelievable.
Yeah.
We
I was trying to avoid that one intentionally.
Well, at Flying Todd, we hosted a dinner last May, about 35 people there, and we're a research house. Come to our dinners, right? We asked you a lot of questions. It was interesting. I asked, did people think that AI was over, under, appropriately hyped? And about 2/3 of the room felt it was over or appropriately. And I think, one of two people. I'm like, it is completely underhyped. And think about it, we didn't have even agentic then. And so I think it goes back to, right, it's the data, all the data that we have shows that people, probably like the three of us, who are either like, we're continuing to grow every day through using different, large language models or building agents or whatever, wherever you might be on your path. I was told it's 137 hours to be an expert in AI and 13 hours to be a beginner. So I would assume we are all way past expert, but it's really interesting because I find I keep expecting that I'm going to be working less. I'm actually working more.
Yes.
Right. And then when I'm
Totally.
traveling now, I have like a sense of anxiety, and I'm not an anxious person because I'm like, I really should be at home, right? Like building things. And so it's really interesting, I think, how all of us are kind of thinking differently about the opportunities inside of our companies, because it's, and especially if you guys, we're a startup, but you guys are a newer startup than we are. I mean, you know, you're still painting, right, like the lines on the road. And
It's exciting. Our team is so excited. They work all the time. And that has ramped up in the last 3 to 6 months as the agentic stuff has come, because the ability for experienced people to have an impact. So you take your experience and you arm yourself with these tools, and your impact is just tremendous.
I have thought that from day one, that you would have either, right, the kids who are kind of straight out of school who are using AI and everything they do, and it's like, they're not AI native, but they're as AI native as any of us. And then those people, we'd done a bunch of research on this, and they showed, I think it was kind of 45 to 55, or just call it 45 and above, right? Because you have a certain number of years of experience, that you'll be able to see, right, patterns or understand demand signals in a different way. And when you kind of then partner with AI, right, like it's a really amazing opportunity. I could have talked to you guys for like another hour. This was super fun. I'm really excited about what you're doing at Crescendo. Like I said, I'd always felt that there was an opportunity for a company to do exactly what you're doing. And I will be quite honest, you're the only ones that I've seen who are kind of taking it on. Well, I don't even think I need to wish you luck. I think it's just about having enough hours in the day to talk to enough customers and tell them what you're doing. So, please let our audience know how to reach you.
Yeah, our website is crescendo.ai. Best place to reach me is probably LinkedIn.
Yes, probably same. LinkedIn, very easy to find. I'm the only famous person on LinkedIn.
I will say, I'm like, I look at Mike Ryan's, I'm like, wow, with the name Deborah Weinswig, I don't have that problem because I'm the only one. But I was like, wow, I'm like, some of these names, it's tough. And Todd, also spelling with one D, I'm like, it was, you're an easy person to find, but also a name that like you just won't forget. So thanks to both of you for being on today. We really enjoyed the experience, and I look forward to having you back again soon, and good luck with everything you're doing.
This was fun. Thanks, Deborah.
Hey, thanks, Deborah. See ya.
Thanks, Deborah. And thank you for joining us this week. Coresight Research serves our members with time-sensitive research on consumer shopping behavior, retail technology innovation, financial outlooks for industry leaders, and trends across every retail vertical. We also facilitate leadership communities, conduct seminars and conferences, provide strategic consulting, conduct technology assessments, and develop proprietary data resources. Visit us at Coresight.com to learn about all the ways we can support your success. Have a wonderful week.